So we will move forward with our presentation today on AT consideration. We will define what AT is. Diana will talk to us about some AT tools, and then we will move to, how that consideration process, good practices, all the way to implementation. Okay, so let's go over our learning objectives today. And we want you to increase your understanding of assistive technology and how it can help your child or student. We want to help you increase knowledge of AT tools, services, and resources, and help you understand how to effectively consider a student's need for assistive technology. So that's the focus for today. And let's dive right in with how can AT help students? So let's start with what is AT, right? So what is assistive technology? It's a device, so any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with a disability. And the term does not include a medical device that is surgically implanted or the replacement of such device. Okay, so in simple terms, anything that can help an individual with a disability do something they couldn't do otherwise. And in school-based terms, anything that can help a student function better in the academic setting. Okay, such as reading, writing, mobility, communication, vision, hearing, social skills, independent living skills, computer access, right? Very important to include in that individualized education program any technology, low tech, simple tools, small things like maybe coloring, measuring cups, color filters, anything the student is using. So it'll be continued, right, year to year. And we'll talk about that a little more. And in assistive technology is also a service. Any service that directly assists an individual with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. So this is an important piece, right? Assessment is a service. Exploring assistive technology is a service. Texploration with PHP could be a service, right? Training, implementation, timelines, meeting dates. All these are important aspects to make AT work for a student, right? It's not just making things convenient. It's assistive technology is really a life-changing item, right? Or product, device, or service that is life-changing for a person with a disability. Okay, and so about the services, it's very important to talk about them because this is very often where breakdowns occur, right? So the success of AT occurs when the AT service is well described in the IEP. So services are evaluation of the needs of the child, including a functional evaluation in his customary environment, where the child is, right? Where it will be used. Also providing for the acquisition. Where are we going to find the assistive technology, right? How are we going to purchase it and acquire it? Also selecting it, designing, sometimes fitting, right? If we purchase a device, maybe, then it needs to be fit to maybe a wheelchair, for example, right? We need to customize it. We need to add a cover for it to protect it, right? And also we need to keep it up. You need to give it maintenance, repairs, updates to software, right? Or replace, right? How are we going to do that? That's part of the AT services. Also, we need to coordinate therapies, interventions, or services, right, with AT. Somebody needs to be coordinating all this. It also involves training or technical assistance for the student or his family, right? The teachers. Training is also an AT service and a very important part. And technical assistance also for the professionals, employers, or others who are involved, other members of the team who are involved with the child. Okay, so device or service. And also, there is not like a official list of approved assistive technology under special education laws or for schools, but technology can be from simple, very simple and inexpensive, or to more sophisticated. So we call it the continuum from low tech to high tech, right? So low tech AT is that is simple, requires little maintenance, right? And limited electronics, for example, right? So graphic organizers, visual schedules, pencil grips are some examples of low tech that is easy to acquire and low cost, right? And usually also the cost has to do with the low or high continuum. Mid-tech would be something that requires more maintenance, a little more training, and maybe has more electronics, a calculator, for example, a communication device with a recording option, or switch toys that also require batteries and maintenance, and are high-tech, which are more complex electronics that, of course, will require more training from specialists, right? And more maintenance and updates. For example, software, right? Text to speech, your iPads or computers, right? We need to really keep up with that. So when determining someone's AT needs, it's important to remember that one size does not fit all, right? Low-tech options may work for some, while others will require more high-tech solutions, right? So let's move forward to assistive technology and how it assists a student. So assistive technology can help a student with many aspects in their function daily in the classroom, with reading and writing, math, communication, computer access, study skills, social skills, planning, mobility, right? So these are some samples. And furthermore, it really allows for high expectations of the learner, right? And thereby, hopefully, the student ultimately also will feel more independence and believe in their abilities to learn, right? Having access to these supports that can help them move forward. Okay. So assistive technology, why, right? So to facilitate access to the curriculum, right? To prevent widening that learning gap, right? To address the learning gap with the peers, to motivate engagement, to build self-esteem, right? Being more independent really helps somebody feel more secure and independent, increase their self-esteem. It also helps interactions with peers, right? To be more at the level with the peers. And it breaks down cycles of failure, of course. Allows the student to better learn and demonstrate what they know. Okay, so some of the reasons for assistive technology. And so let's talk about the difference between educational technology and assistive technology. Okay, so you might see a lot of things in a student's learning environment. If these things that are universally available to all students in the education environment to engage students in learning or enhancing their learning, this is educational technology, right? Educational technology is applicable across the full spectrum of the classroom, while assistive technology is intended for one diverse learner and is part of their individualized education plan or program. Okay, and so assistive technology, technology per se, does not automatically become assistive technology when used by a student with a disability. Okay, it will help one student with a disability. It's designed and planned based on his particular goals, right, to help him increase, participate, achieve independence, and it's written into their program. Okay, so a little more to give an example of this is of the difference between educational technology and assistive technology is this red circle illustrates what I was just explaining, right? It shows educational technology that is available to all students. Computers, calculators, headsets, even apps, Chromebooks in the classroom, instructional software, tablets that are available to all students, right? And then we have our yellow circle, right? That our blue circle here is where assistive technology is designed only for a student with a disability, written into their individualized education program. And it may also include the use of what all the other students are using, right? It doesn't mean he doesn't use everything else. It just means this assistive technology is for one particular student, okay? And this is in the framework of Universal Design for Learning, right? So UDL, Universal Design for Learning, as used in IDEA, which is the special education law, defines a base for a definition found. This is found in the Assistive Technology Act. I put a link here that you can learn more about that later and how it describes some of the assistive technology and the rights and regulations around it. But UDL is a framework for ensuring access, participation, and progress in the general curriculum, with emphasis on diverse learners. Okay, so the key concepts of UDL is that curriculum, new materials, for example, and learning technologies are designed to be flexible to accommodate the unique learning styles of a wide range of individuals, including children with disabilities. And some examples are, for example, that websites are accessible, right? Electronic versions of textbooks are available and other materials. Captions, right? Narrated videos, word processors, word prediction, voice recognition, right? So all this is embedded in our curriculums nowadays.
All right, so we are going to take a look at an array of tools that you might consider for students with learning disability. And learning disabilities can be any sort of condition that is affecting the child's learning, not necessarily just the child who requires something because they are diagnosed with a disability. So these can help all learners, but especially those who struggle with learning. So let's take a look at the different categories of assistive technology options that are available. And to really go through the details and name very specific ones takes a tremendous amount of time, but consider today just a quick little overview. Okay. All right, so what we have here is the assistive technology for reading that's low tech. So child struggling with reading. These are some simple tools that might be quick and easy to implement that could help them. So highlighting tape is very versatile. It's essentially like a Post-it note, but it's transparent and it's colored. And just like you can see here, you might use it to mark certain portions in a book. You can use it with different strategies of maybe you're looking for famous people or certain dates, or maybe certain types of topics are coded by certain colors. And then you can add it into the document, whether it's a worksheet, a book, and put it right in there so the eyes can track and find or organize the information using the highlighting tape. The next one is a reading ruler. And the reading ruler has some darker opaque areas, and it also has a lighter area where you can actually see through that portion, and it color codes the portion that you are adjusting that reading ruler to, and then your eyes can track that area perhaps a little bit more effectively. A page magnifier you see here magnifies the entire page and not just one line at a time, which is different than the magnifying bars. And a page just makes everything on that entire page larger for easier visibility. Now, colored overlays allow you to through a low-tech device, change the color of the background and contrast to the printed text. And some people report that it's easier for them to track. They make fewer reading errors when there are certain degrees of ideal contrast between the text and its background. So these are things to try and experiment with to see if any of them help. Here, we see two different kinds of reading guides. One might be smaller, so you focus your eyes into a much smaller area, and others might be a little bit larger with some colored transparent area so that you're blocking out more of the words on a page. It can be extremely distracting to see a lot of little tiny printed words on a page. So by blocking some of that out allows the reader to focus in on one portion at a time for them to more effectively be decoding and reading. And so if we're looking at high-tech options, there are many different options in many areas. So whether it's reading, writing, spelling, and grammar, note-taking, studying, comprehension, planning, there's a huge array of high-tech options if a student is ready for that level of support and they are pretty fluent with the platforms from which they operate. And so you can get more basic high-tech options, or you can get a much more feature-packed option. And now the formats that they come in, they might be an app, they can be an extension, or maybe more in a more dated form, a software format. So software is something that maybe the previous 10, 15 years, we're more familiar with software and CD formats. And then now things are really becoming very easily accessible through the apps and extensions that through just a couple clicks through a Chrome web store or a Safari web store, you can quickly add these apps and extensions to your browsers, and then you have the tool at your hands. Some of them are free, and some of them have subscriptions, and some of them are a one-time purchase type of program. All right, so some that you might have seen that are very accessible in your common tools, like any word processing program typically has different ways you can choose different fonts, different sizes of the fonts, even adjusting the color of the font, putting in a background color to the font. So all of these are in every word processing program. You can highlight words in certain basic ways also. Maybe slightly less common is adjusting the spacing between words, but you can also adjust the print size. But the spacing between words and maybe the spacing between each letter can also be adjusted in certain programs. Now, one common feature that families look for in supporting readers is text-to-speech and highlighting. And we do see research showing that the pairing of the two, of the text-to-speak, that is when you speak, then it's when you see the printed words on the page, like you see in this picture, when you see the printed words on the page, then you hear the voice read it aloud. It could be a computerized voice, it could be a natural human voice, but that is the text-to-speech. And if you pair that with the highlighting, we do see that it increasing the ability of the person with the learning disability. They're better able to read and comprehend, and almost to an average reader's level. So that's really exciting to know. So this is a really important feature to consider and see if that meets the needs of a child. It can help a lot of different learners even without a disability. And note that the highlighting here that we see is called dual highlighting. And that means that it has highlighted some portions preceding the actual word that's being spoken, in addition to highlighting the exact word being spoken. And so text-to-speech, more and more we see that built in as an accessibility option that is universally available. So Susanna mentioned the principle of UDL, Universally Design of Learning. And so what it does is it breaks down the stigma of utilizing these types of accessibility features. And so you see text-to-speech options on computers, phones, tablets, a variety, almost every word processing platform these days has it, like the Google Suite series, the Word 365, as well as the Safari or the Apple products also have them built in. And then very excitingly, the browsers also has these things built into it. So I wanted to especially mention this browser because it was released early in this year. Microsoft Edge browser is completely redesigned. It's not the old Edge browser that maybe you used 5 years ago, 7 years ago. It is completely redesigned based on the Chromium platform, which is a Google platform that they base the Chrome browser upon. And they designed this browser to have built in all these features that support reading. And these features were selected because they support the individual that typically has dyslexia. And so all of these support that type of reader. Enhanced dictation, a focus mode that kind of blocks out other stuff to reduce distractions. Immersive reading, font spacing, short lines, parts of speech. So this is all built into the browser. And so with 1 or 2 clicks, you can click whatever options you want on or off. You have a play button that shows up at the top if you select the immersive reader option, and then the read aloud can occur. So it's really, really exciting. I just wanted to especially point that out. And you can port over all the add-ons and extensions that you might have in your Chrome and add them into your Edge browser. So you can add anything from the Chrome Web Store into the Edge browser as an extension. So earlier we mentioned text-to-speech being extremely useful for all learners, especially those who struggle with reading difficulties and like dyslexia. And so here are 4 options for you that have very comprehensive supports beyond text-to-speech. But somebody mentioned earlier, which ones can be adapted for even the younger user. And I would say of all of these, especially the read and write, that toolbar can be simplified so there are fewer tools in their toolbar, and you can adapt it to the younger, even as young as they say first grade, because you can just put 1 or 2 or just text-to-speech, play button, pause button, stop button right there, and they just click play, stop, play, and stop. And that's perfectly within the skill set of many first graders. The other ones have many other tools, and you can also explore those as well. But many of the other ones are probably better designed for a more mature learner, probably 4th grade and older. Some of the basic tools that you might look into if you just wanted to either spend less or look for something a little more basic, fewer features, are listed here on the right. And here you can take a look at these. The most common features in a text-to-speech tool include the read aloud, highlighting, font spacing, color filtration, different dictionaries, and then other tools. One that is also really important more and more these days are like an optical character recognition type of tool for a PDF screenshot reader. So you can look for those types of options. So if a student sent a PDF, it may or may not work with the regular read aloud feature, the text-to-speech feature, and so it might need optical character recognition built into that software, and so you might look into a screenshot reader. And if, for example, your student has been assigned something to read that's very complex, maybe it's a textbook, maybe it's a novel, there are different places that you can find these to support a learner. And these learners will need to be able to, if they're going to use their text-to-speech option, they need to be able to pull that type of literature into a digital format that we're calling e-text. And so here are two options. They provide the most comprehensive services, and they support specifically the individuals who have print disabilities. And they're different in a couple ways. So Learning Ally does have a fee. Their primary format does include human narration, in addition to just the regular digitized text. And it works on a variety of platforms, but it has a built-in reader that you have to use with the e-text, the downloaded books that you get from Learning Ally. In Bookshare, it's free, and you can have, let's say you're eligible through your school, you can also apply as a private individual to have leisure book reading beyond just assigned school text available to you. So it's free. You can apply to have your own private membership. You can download the e-text in a variety of formats, but it uses a computerized voices. They do not have a team of volunteers or staff that read the books. And so it's only available through a digitized voice. They do have a built-in text-to-speech reader, but it's a very, very basic type. And these books from Bookshare, they're available to download, and you can use another third-party application to read those books. And if you don't qualify for a learning disability, eligible print disability for Learning Ally and Bookshare, you can find e-text and other sources. So there are many types of sources of public domain books, and public domain books are books that are no longer protected by copyright. So anybody can take that literature and put it on the internet, they can read it, they can use it in a variety of ways without violating copyright restrictions. And so here are several different sources of those public domain books. Now you can also subscribe through, these more well-known groups: Audible, Scribd, audiobooks.com, Book Riot. You can subscribe and get any of the copyrighted books in the e-text format there. And of course, you can get it through your library. Public, college, there's also an online library called Open Library. And then to access the e-text, sometimes families will download these applications to interact with the text. And last but not least, there's a YouTube channel. Many YouTube channels that have audio books there, and most of these are public domain books being read aloud to you, sometimes a digitized voice, sometimes a human voice, but these are 3 YouTube channels that carry those types of books. Let's move on to the writing piece. So here we have some writing tools for low-tech writing tools, and commonly you see the suggestion of if a child isn't able to grasp a pencil or pen well, trying a variety of different types of grips on the pencil or pen. There are adapted implements, like this is a whole different style of grip where the implement can actually be a completely different shape to adapt to the grasping style. There is specialized paper. Maybe it has raised lines. Maybe it has colors that help the user see, visualize, have tactile feedback while trying to write. And if getting in the right posture for writing is difficult, consider a slant board. The slant board props things up so that the writer is more able to stabilize and get their arm in the correct position for writing. On that same level, there is, for getting in the same position, a good position for writing is having something that holds up your paper. So you don't have to bend over and struggle to see things. If you have something that is posted really close to you in a vertical format, then you can more easily move your eyes from one plateau or plane to another plane and reference things and write things down. There's the a grid that you can use. These writing grids can be placed over the paper, and then when you're writing, it helps them to stay inside the lines and helps guide that writing process physically. And then maybe a graphic organizer or a word bank. This book is a paragraph builder. It gives suggestions visually and structurally, organizationally, how to get started with the writing process. And of course, the high-tech options cover a wide variety of areas. Perhaps your child is struggling with handwriting, typing, fine motor, spelling, grammar, vocabulary, written expression, organization, note-taking. Note-taking is really a big area of focus for many students, especially older students. And memory or working memory. All of these areas can lend themselves to requiring different writing supports. So let's take a look at what you can look into. So spelling and word prediction and spelling supports are pretty, well known. They are built into many different types of supports and programs, universally available. But if you wanted something that provided a little bit more than just spelling correction, then you might look into Grammarly or Ginger. Both of these have free options, and then for a fee, you get enhanced features. Grammarly has really moved to kind of its more of its namesake. It's moved more towards a grammar focus and support on top of its spelling support. So it really is a standout that way. Ginger is moving in that direction as well. So not only do they support spelling, but also a grammar and advancing one's writing style with suggestions. So we mentioned spelling is built into most types of word prediction documents, but let's talk about what is smart word prediction. Smart word prediction is when the word prediction, the words that are suggested, are actually considering the context of what you are typing, what is being said. Maybe you can assign a topic to your word predictor, and then it knows that maybe you're writing about George Washington or about the Civil War, and it will then start pulling words to support those topics. So there's a variety of different smart word prediction options in the comprehensive supports, and these are two products that that do have that. So looking at the word prediction, here are two examples. If you're doing dictation, this product from Don Johnston's co-writer program, it provides you with speech to text, but not just regular speech to text like you're dictating into your smartphone. It actually allows you to, this one allows you to assign a topic-specific dictionary to its word prediction. And so as you're dictating, it knows you're talking about Abraham Lincoln, perhaps. And so as you are dictating, it is providing words for you that are on that specific topics. So here you can look for the icon and select dictation. If you were typing, this would be the word choice box that would show up. And then as the proper selection appeared, then you could select that number, just press that number, and it pops right into the tool. Okay, it pops right into your document. And this would work with a Google document. And so on the right side, we see a different type of example. You see here, the student is using some inventive or phonetic spelling to start typing out the word right. And so they're sounding it out in their head, and they may spell it differently every time, and that's okay. But this program understands that and can identify flexible spelling and give appropriate suggestions. So it suggests right as the most likely option that you are trying to spell. And so you would just click number 1, and it would put that into your word processing document. Now, perhaps you're looking into getting support for your writing for planning and organizing. And so in the planning and organizing of the writing process includes many different steps. A student has to first visualize, then plan their writing, then organize their writing, then actually write it, and maybe they have to present it to their peers. And so using a mind map type of program is what we're showing you here. This is actually from Inspiration, and you can insert an image that represents the main topic, and you can type in the main topic like it is here in the red circle, and then your subtopics are typed out. And then your supporting details then fan out below that. And what's really neat about many of these programs is that with a click of a button, this mind map that helps a child just kind of get all their ideas thrown out there on paper and documented. It allows them with a click of a mouse to pull all of that into an outline format. So, and then when they're ready to kind of reshuffle everything, they can go back to their mind map and then start pulling things around and reorganizing their information. All right, and moving on to planning and organizing, and this is the zoomed out picture. Let's say not only does a child have to write that essay about using their mind map, but now they also have to plan out their presentation date and then keep track of their other classes. And so that type of planning requires some sort of support. Many schools provide a physical planner, and others do not. So if a digital planner is something that the child is interested in using, there are many options out there. We listed a couple here. But also, don't forget about some of these other things that have been pushed into the home as a smart home concept. It can also be extended to the student as a support. So let's say the student really doesn't like to write or type. They can ask their, Alexa or their Google Assistant or Siri to, set a reminder, set a countdown timer for 5 minutes, add into the calendar, webinar Saturday, 10 a.m., things like that. They can add it into their calendar with their voice. So depending on your child's needs, consider some of these as an option or strategy. So note-taking, I said earlier, was really, really of high need for individuals in the upper grades. And so I wanted to mention this specifically, that sometimes on the low-tech side, a peer note-taker, maybe a study buddy, somebody like that might be assigned as a note-taking strategy. Right? On the high-tech side, oftentimes what's suggested or offered and discussed is some sort of audio recording, maybe a LiveScribe pen, Sonocent, and their newer product Glean are different ways of also pairing the PDF of a presentation with the audio recording as the teacher is discussing things. And a couple apps to consider are Notability and GoodNotes. They're apps, but they're also available as a desktop program, but maybe with more limited features. If the student really likes to handwrite notes and is using a tablet, then Notability and GoodNotes might be a good option to consider. So we're going to cruise through some of the math options just really quickly. So for low tech, mostly for the younger grades, we have some of these types of things. And all of these things are geared towards how can you help the student visualize their math in a way that actually makes sense to them. It's less abstract. And so fraction calculators. And this one allows you to show the number on top and number on bottom and make those calculations the way you would do it on a worksheet. Coinulator for visualizing and manipulating money. A coin abacus. Talking calculators. Color-coded rulers. Sometimes the addition of color can really enhance the ability to remember things. So improves memory recall. And so these are ones that are commonly used right now for curriculum aids or enrichment. And so I just wanted to put them out there. Some of them are free. Some of them have some free elements and some paid elements. So take a look at these. And I bring them up because they are options to allow you to use virtual manipulatives. With this day and age of education, we need to find as many ways of making things more realistic. And so they have very realistic images of 3D objects. And of course, if you're at home, you could certainly pull out these 3D objects, but if it's not possible for you, then this is a good alternative. And for the older grades, perhaps they need to have the voice typing and they're trying to do complex math. Maybe they need to do some handwriting. They prefer to handwrite their math, but it's not really legible. And so this is Equagio, made by Text Help. It is free for teachers, but if you want to use it with a student, then it requires payment. But you can voice type or handwrite the information here. You can also create text boxes and type it in normally. You can create shapes and things like that. And then as you are typing it in here or inputting the information in here on the left side, it appears on the right side in the digitized text. So neatly typed out, neatly formatted, completely legible. And then from here, you can insert the math into a Google Doc and then have the student turn in their math through that manner. And you can pull it back the other way. Let's say there's information in a Google Doc, you can pull it back into Equagio and it shows up here and that the child needs to interact with it and manipulate it. Then they pull it to this side and they make their edits and then they push it back into the Google Doc. So that is a really great feature-packed option. And if you're looking at the tablet, there are just a huge array of different types of math apps out there. So if there's any specific type of area, just, these things change so quickly and you kind of have to look at, is it still being supported? Is it still being updated? Things like that to determine, is it a good type of app or not? And then just play with it, see if it's the right form factor that meets the needs of the child. If earlier we mentioned text-to-speech for math, here's another option, Math Talk. Specialized calculators, here's another variety. Microsoft's Math Solver is kind of has newer updates these days, so check that out. You can take pictures and then import it into Microsoft Math Solver, and it does a really great job of kind of explaining step by step what is going on and how to solve the problem. And lastly, we are going to touch on AT for sensory needs, because many times we see not only are the learning aspects being affected and require AT, but there are some other comorbid conditions like maybe sensory integration and maybe it has a need to move, wiggle around, or distractibility. These are some things that you can look into that support learning as well. So noise canceling headphones, And I should point out that there's a difference between noise blocking and active noise canceling, which actually emits a sound that negates the actual sound that is coming in the ear. And that's more for like white noise or engine noise, motors, and things like that. It can really effectively cancel out those noise. So maybe you want a combination of noise blocking with noise canceling. There's a whole array of different types of noise canceling headphones out there. And different sensitivities to things being in the ear canal versus covering on the outside, different comfort levels. So play with the different form factors for headphones. If the child really likes to wiggle, there's wedge cushions, or maybe that helps them get some sensory feedback so they can sit still a little bit longer. And the fidget pod allows a student to, use their tactile sensory input and just kind of get some sort of satisfaction with touching certain, getting certain sensory input through their hands, and maybe that allows them to sit still. And the bottom two, the compression vest and weighted lap pad, research shows that sometimes with that proprioceptive input, some sort of sensory input through pressure allows a student to also feel more calm and settled, and it allows them to sustain their concentration longer. So our key takeaways from this segment are for student access to learning, assistive technology for reading, writing, note-taking, organization, planning, math, and more can be considered. And also consider what strategies and support you should be pairing with that assistive technology. And then together, the learning needs and the goals determine whether particular assistive technology tools, features, are the right match for a student.
So let's talk about the AT consideration all the way to implementation, right? So the discussion of AT is called the consideration process, and that is how to bring this up with our IEP and school teams, and what are the best practices for a meaningful consideration process for a student. So let's talk about that, the key components and some concepts for best practices for an appropriate AT consideration. And so let's start with the two laws that define special education. We've mentioned them before. It's IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that, mentions that in developing each child's IEP, the IEP team must consider whether the child needs assistive technology devices and services. Okay, so school-age children are covered by IDEA when they have special needs and they qualify for an IEP plan or a Section 504 plan. And this is from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, right? That also mentions that students on a 504 plan are entitled to assistive technology as a reasonable accommodation. Okay, so students on 504 plans may also receive AT as an accommodation and to ensure their access to education and to the curriculum. So in both cases, teams must meet to discuss the academic concerns and needs of a child and discuss the goals and consider whether assistive technology is an appropriate way to address the needs and the goals for a student. Okay. So what is AT consideration, right? We've heard the term, it's on our title, and it's in special education laws. So AT consideration, right? We know by now that it's probably a short discussion because it happens at an IEP meeting, okay? And you can request an IEP meeting in writing, and the school district must hold an IEP meeting when you request it in writing within 30 days from your written request. An email counts as a written request, and you can share with your team your proposed agenda in advance, right? So I would like this meeting to discuss or for us to consider assistive technology, and these are my concerns, right? So the staff that needs to be present is present, right, in the planning. And so consideration should also happen after the goals are developed. So appropriate process of getting assessments and writing those goals for your child is very important, right? Because the services are and consideration of what is needed to meet those goals is developed afterwards, right? And reviewed after according to those goals that we need to meet, right? So we can also revisit goals at any time, and they can be modified, and we can make edits, right, with more details if it's needed, if it's agreed that it's needed by the team, right? So if you already have your goals, you just had your IEP meeting, for example, you can still say, I have a concern that this goal may not be easily met, and I would like to, reconvene and take a look at the goals, right? And, very important that the consideration of assistive technology during an IEP meeting and the process is an IEP team decision, right? We are part of that team as parents. So 3 important aspects. And who should be there, right? We said if we request a meeting, and appropriate staff should be there. So these are some examples of who should be present, right? Required members of the team are always parents. If we're going to discuss AT, assistive technology, then our AT specialist or the person from the district or school that is more knowledgeable on assistive technology should probably be present. Our child's teacher and an administrator, right? Those who make important decisions should also be part of the team from the beginning, right? So we don't catch them off guard later. Important that they participate in the decision process. Optional, maybe some other related service providers that could be your therapists, right? That have important input about your child, could be present at that meeting. Any private professionals that you may want to invite can also be invited to any IEP meeting. So in the case of assistive technology as well. And of course, the student, if appropriate, right? If the student is at an age that is working on self-advocacy, self-awareness, and wants to start learning to advocate for himself, if it's appropriate or at different times of the meeting, you can start bringing in your child as well to participate in the planning of their own plan. Isn't that important, right? So very good. So let's see what we can infer so far. We can infer that the consideration of assistive technology is a brief process during an IEP meeting. It's a short discussion to begin. It takes place during the IEP meeting and usually happens after the goals have been developed or reviewed, and it's a team decision, right? So just recapping those important parts. Should I make a quick stop? Let me know. Okay, it seems like we can keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. I think we can save a couple of these questions for later.
Sounds great. Okay, for time's sakes, let's keep going. So let's talk about best practice for assistive technology. And there are some wonderful research and resources out there for you to explore. So this is QIAT, Quality Indicators for Assistive Technology Services, and they are a nationwide grassroots organization that includes hundreds of individuals who provide input into the ongoing process of identifying, disseminating, and implementing a set of widely applicable quality indicators for assistive technology services. So even though it's a brief process during our Individualized Education Program meeting, maybe, there is a lot of information available for our teams. Okay, so our schools can have access to these indicators. And so some of the indicators that QIAT tells us are best practices for consideration is that our team members should have knowledge to make informed decisions, okay? So we need team members that are knowledgeable, right? Or we need to bring them. We need to be able to explore a continuum of devices and services, right? A variety. We need to use a well-defined process to make decisions as well, and base those decisions on data. Right? I just heard the term data is delicious. So our professionals, our educators are used to gathering data, and it's important to base our decisions and also for any changes afterwards. So data is a key component of planning and also of implementation. We'll talk about that later. Okay. And the students' goals. The students' goals are a centerpiece and best practices for consideration. And we also, a good practice is the documentation in our IEP document, right? On paper, where you need to document the reasons to use or not to use assistive technology for a student when there was a concern and a possible need. We'll talk about that too. Common errors, and this is important, is that AT is considered for those with severe disabilities only, right? Because we saw with all the examples that Diana shared, there are a variety of needs that a student may have to access their curriculum, their environment, right? Their materials. Also, a common error is when no one on the team is knowledgeable regarding assistive technology, right? We need to look for somebody who has more knowledge if that is the case. Also, that the team does not use a consistent process based on data about our student, right, or the client, that doesn't consider the environments and the tasks that are needed to make those decisions, to base those decisions on. And also, a common error is that consideration of assistive technology is limited to those that are familiar. That are familiar to team members, right? So we need to participate as a wide team that supports the student, right? Even the student is a very key component, right, in this process. So let's look into some steps for consideration. So these are three main steps that are identified by the Wisconsin Center for Technology, and we'll share that resource with you too. So first would be to examine new goals and the environment. Okay, so to identify tasks to accomplish those goals for the student. Okay, so the team may look at previous data, right? Is there a goal to address an area of need, right? If there's not enough data, we may need to consider more assessments. Okay, so we'll talk about this. We also need to determine the student's level of difficulty with the task, right? Where is the student? What level is he at with, acquiring a skill or being able to do a task, right? And three is we need to reach one of four outcomes. So let's talk about what those outcomes of the consideration process are. So these are the four outcomes that we have identified. Is no, we have reviewed, and assistive technology is not needed, and we document in the IEP why. The second outcome would be yes, there is assistive technology that is already being used, right? And it's working. We know specific devices and or technology, low tech, anything that the student is using, and that is working. He's meeting his goals with that. So we document that it's already known and it's working, we're making progress, and we document in the IEP. Three, maybe yes, we think there is new assistive technology that should be tried, right? And we need to describe it and how it's going to be tried and document in the IEP the trial processes that we're going to follow. The team already knows this is available. There's knowledge, right? Somebody knows about it, and we're going to do some trials. We're going to see if this works. And the fourth possible outcome is we don't know. The team needs more information, right? We need to reconvene because we need to go find some more information, right? Or we need to refer for an assistive technology assessment. And as the other 3 steps, we need to document this step in the IEP. Okay, we need to document that we need more information or that we're going to refer to an assistive technology assessment. Who, what, when, where, and how, right? How are we going to follow through with a timeline? Okay, so those are 4 possible outcomes. And so this is a review of them, right? So you can use the finger picture is very useful. So 1 is no, no AT is needed. Why? And document. 2 would be yes. We know there's assistive technology that is currently being used. It's working specific AT, and we document. 3, we would like to try something new. Okay, and we will describe it, and we'll do some trials. Or 4, the team doesn't have enough information. We need to obtain more information or refer for an AT assessment. Okay, and always document. So I'm going to go really quickly through some frameworks and forms that are available for the appropriate practice, right, of consideration. You can look into them. So this is to pair, like Diana was talking about, right? Important to pair the student's needs. So instead of saying, what assistive technology does the student with a certain disability, right? So what AT is does a student with autism need, right? Our way of thinking should instead be, what assistive technology do students who have difficulty with, right, a certain skill, reading, writing, understanding, paying attention, etc., need? So that's where it's individualized, right? We base it on the student's needs that are expressed in his individualized goals. So these forms are helpful for going through those needs. So we have the set from Joyce Zabala. All this is online and explains every single one of the resources. KIAT for indicators for quality. The WADI, right, Wisconsin Assistive Technology Institute. They have many publications. And the Georgia Project for Assistive Technology. So I've added those links there for you to check, and I'm going to go quickly through some samples of their forms that are available to explore for best practices. Okay, and they have a lot more forms and sample forms to use for the consideration process that are accessible to our teams. Okay, so this is the set from Joyce Havala, which collects information about the student, environment, the tasks, and the tools. So as you can see, they provide a really guided way to collect that information and the data. Okay, so the set is a tool for the organization of information. Okay, and so SET stands for Student, Environment, Tasks, and Tools. So as it is there on the 4 columns you see. And so to select which assistive technology is the right one, right? We look into the student's needs and goals, as we said. We look at the specialists and their recommendations. We look at research, at assessment recommendations, right? And we can use an assistive technology resource guide like the one from GPAT, right? So this is a document about 10 pages long, and it's a reference sheet for teams to see, right, to collect their data and see clearly many examples of assistive technology grouped by different categories. So I believe it's on this page, you can see the categories, right? So it actually lists the assistive technology for each category. So we can start pairing it, right, with the student's needs. This is a sample of the WADI, Assistive Technology Consideration Guide, and it also is a form for guiding that collection of data, right? Motor, computer access, written material, communication, reading, organization. So teams can make use of this very useful form. There's also SIFs, which is a web-based survey tool for where IEP teams can select statements that best represent their students' strengths and needs, targeted tasks for the assistive technology that will support the student and the environments where the task will occur with a selected domain, right? So also a very good tool available to match students' needs and strengths to AT features. Okay, so I really encourage you to take a look at these. They're interesting tools that are available. And this is a simple form as well for app considerations, right? So important question to ask about, applications that now are so much used for students. Many times for our little ones, we use a lot of apps, okay? So this is a nice guide for considering the use of apps. So take a look at those. Very interesting and important information. There's a lot more on every one of those websites that we shared there. So some questions for your IEP team. So has the student had the same goals year to year is a common question that we hear, right? What's going on, right? Do we need to reconsider? Is the student making reasonable progress towards the goals, right? Does the team anticipate that the student will achieve the goals by the year end, right? If the goal is, at a high level for achievement, what do we need to do to support the student to support that? And does the goal require tasks or capabilities that are difficult or impossible for the student, right? Is the student as independent as he could be as he works towards goals? So all those are important questions to ask our IEP team. Also for our 504 team, right? If a student with a disability who is not receiving special education services needs an AT device to fully participate in a school program, right? The Section 504 plan may require the school to provide the device as well and the training needed to effectively use it. So your child may get AT as a reasonable accommodation under his 504 plan, right? So some questions would be, does the student have access to the curriculum? Is there any difficulty with access to the curriculum? Is the educational program, equal to that provided to his not disabled peers? Are the accommodations and strategies currently being used to address the student's challenges successfully? Right? So remember, 504 plans are to support a student to not be discriminated, right, in the school environment and for reasonable accommodations. Okay, and so documenting. Let's talk about documenting. Why will the team document AT consideration, the consideration process? You can document it here. So there's our sections. These are some examples of IEP forms used in Santa Clara County. So remember that if you're in a different county, your forms may look different, but they do have to have these areas in some place. So you may look for them. Right? Where is AT mentioned? It should be in all the forms, right? So does the student require assistive technology devices or services? And there's a yes, no, and it says specify. So this is where we document the process, right? And the team should document the reasons of any decisions here. Okay, so does the student require low incidence services? And this is for equipment or materials for low incidence disabilities, okay? And so that's an example. I believe there's a little more in the bottom, another example of a form that is in the special factors page also. So the way to find this is your special factors page. Most different forms will have this title of special factors. And so next, let's talk about that fourth option, right? Remember our fourth outcome, which was we need more information. And so we mentioned that maybe an assistive technology assessment is needed, okay? So when? So we know that when a student, when we don't have enough information, right, we can't identify any tools, the team needs more information. When the student is not making reasonable progress towards the goals or is not achieving his goals and objectives, when there is difficulty accessing the curriculum, and where the student is not as independent as he or she could be. Okay, so that the IEP cannot identify any assistive technology tools or services, so we need a specialist to do an assessment. Okay, and so an assistive technology assessment is important for selecting the correct assistive technology device, right? And there's an example. It's like buying a pair of shoes, right? The shoes may not cover your feet, but do they fit? Right? If those shoes hurt your feet, or are you going to keep wearing them? Right? So likewise, if the assistive technology is too challenging, um, uh, to learn, or it doesn't meet the needs of the child, are we going to keep struggling to make it work, or are we going to join other folks who simply stop using it, right, and say this didn't work, and we abandon the technology, right? So we don't want that to happen. So appropriate process, like we were mentioning, is very important, that it is an IEP team decision, right? It's also a parent request, right? A parent can request based on the process they've had with their IEP team in writing. And the school is required to respond to us as parents within 15 days, also in writing, to let us know if, yes, they agree, right? If we've followed the appropriate process, right? We very likely, will be together arriving at this decision, right? And assessment plans will be made. So if the response is yes, we will receive an assessment plan within those 15 days, which we as parents need to sign and return as soon as possible, because the whole process under IDEA, right, the timeline indicates 60 days to finalize an assessment. So an assistive technology assessment also follows under that timeline of 60 days. Okay. So important to remember, right, that assistive technology assessment is a collaborative process, not a one-time event by a specialist, right? So here's like our superhero saying, here I come to save the day. Then, the rest, what about the rest of the team, right? So depending on how much the team knows, they may seek services of an outside assistive technology specialist, right? To conduct evaluations, trainings, make recommendations, and coordinate the needs during this process. But the input, the involvement of the entire team is what will produce successful results, right? That we're all on the same page and we all know what we are doing, timelines, when, where, and who is very important, right? And so it shouldn't all be based on the recommendations of any just one team member. Okay, it's a collaborative process. And so there are also best practices for assessments, right? So personnel needs to be well trained throughout the educational agencies about assessment processes and how to initiate them, right? And be consistent in conducting the assessments, right? So it needs to be a very clearly defined process conducted by a group of professionals with knowledge, right? And also professionals that work with the student and are familiar with the deficit areas, right? The student and the family should be always actively involved. It's very important to have family input in the process. The assessments need to include the student's customary environments, right? Where does he spend his days, right? What environments does the student need to access? And how, the tasks that he needs to do, how does it look like, right? We also need to take in consideration the time, right? The extended trial period for any choices that we're making. It's important to collect data and in a time period to make sure, we are able to pair the information with the student's needs, right? And collect that data, like we've been mentioning. The list of recommendations for tools to the IEP team, of course, is based on this data from our trial periods, right? In the environment, in the student, his tasks, and his goals. Okay. And there's also reassessments, right? Whenever there's changes, there's not enough information, there's changes in the student, in the environment, or the tasks, we may need to reconsider and think that another assessment may be needed. Okay. I know there might be a question about how often can I request an assessment, right? So we can talk about that usually within a
Yeah, and
year.
actually, Susanna, we can add in here a
Yeah,
couple of questions about assessment.
sure.
Right now, there are no suspended timelines for assessments in the IEP process at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was recently clarified by our state
Mm-hmm.
that school districts are expected to, now that they have time to adjust to this pandemic situation, that grace period of like, let's figure it out later
Yeah,
is gone. And so
yeah,
they have to respond to these assessments in the way that's documented in IDEA, which is the 15-day, document your request and then the 60-day timeline and get back to you with a response, right? And so that's
absolutely.
the COVID assessment clarification. And it does count assessments requests put in writing does count if it's an email. Email does count as a written request.
That's right. Okay. And usually within a year, right, of an assessment being done, because it's such an involved process, right, it requires some time to do it appropriately. So we can participate in the process, which is very important to avoid that we get a result, right, that we don't find appropriate. Right. So following the appropriate process will help us overcome those challenges with assessment. Very good. Any other questions? I'll keep going.
Yeah, why don't you keep
Okay.
going for now, Susanna?
Okay. So the difference between consideration and assessment, as you can tell, right? When we were talking about consideration being a brief process during an individualized education plan meeting, right? So the main difference, I would say, is the depth and the duration, right? So consideration is a short discussion, takes place during your meeting. We use information that we have, and the result is a decision, right? Do we try new assistive technology? Do we continue using the same additional, or do we need more information, right? And the assessment is what extends from that consideration and from that fourth option of more information is needed, right? And so that would by timeline, no more than 60 days. It's, a process that takes much more details and involves a professional, right, that has knowledge in the area to help us. And it looks very closely at the student's abilities, difficulties, demands of the environment, and the tasks, right? And what we get after the assessment should be new information and strategies, right, to meet the goals of the student. And the next step, right, is when we have followed appropriate process is implementation, right? We've now followed a great process using all of these great tools and experts and collaborated with our team. So now let's implement and collect data. Okay, and for this, there are also some important aspects to keep in mind. So for implementation of our plans, we need important to think about who the contact person will be, right, for coordinating all these efforts. Who's going to take that on? What are the responsibilities of the team going to be, right? Timelines. When is this going to be done? What AT devices and services will be used? Okay. How AT will be used across environments, right? The home, the school, the community, and how student, teacher, and parents will be trained also, right? We need to start thinking and what is the appropriate moment and times for training, and how assistive technology will be monitored, right, for the future and evaluated, right? Who and when and how are we going to do this? And any contingency plans as well, right? We also always important to plan for any changes. We never knew we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic, but there are situations that we could think about to prevent, right? Any changes or important transitions that a student will be having. Let's anticipate and put that into our planning. Okay, so this is an example from NATRI, the National Assistive Technology Research Resource Institute. And so these are, it's a sample of an implementation form that can help guide the implementation process. So I'm not going to go too much in detail over it. You can find it. This is the PDF that you can download. And they have many more forms also on their website. And I believe this one can also be found in Spanish. I just found it. So a lot of resources also are readily available to you in multiple formats for families and for school personnel, right? And it's important to know where they are. So we've shared many of them with you today and how to locate them. So this is the Santa Clara County Special Education AT guidelines and resources that's also available online, right? So think about what are your SELPA and district guidelines, right? It's important to take a look and know those, right? What does consideration look like for IEP teams in your school district, right? Is this procedure outlined somewhere that we can find? We can find it and use it as a referral, right? So we can ask our teams, right? I know this is available. I've read it. Have you? Let's have the conversation. Okay. Oh, pause. Let's see. Let me know, Diana, if there's any questions. And if not, we're going to consider, we're going to almost be reaching the end, so I can keep going as well.
Um, I think we have a couple questions about assessment. So if people don't
Sure.
mind and indulging our time a little bit here,
Sure.
shouldn't the assistive technology assessment be done before an IEP meeting? And the second one is very similar. If assessment plan has already been signed, can an assistive technology assessment still be requested, like a second assessment request for AT after the initial assessment plan for the regular IEP has been done?
Interesting. Okay. So it seems like these are clarification questions. So help me, Diana, if you can't. But I understand remember that we are parts of the team. So also during the assessment, when we get the assessment plan, you could always write into that page what your concerns are, or if you have questions about the assessment, right? What is it called? What kind of assessment are you using? Could you keep me informed? I want to be involved as a parent on the steps, right? Can you tell me the dates, right? Whatever does the professional who does assessments should be able to tell you what is allowed or not according to the instrument that they'll be using. But usually you can be involved as a parent in knowing that information or being explained, right? What the process are. If there's any questions to it, also, even though you already signed, you can always contact that coordinator, right? And say, I have some concerns about the assessment. Can we add, right? Or do I need to request this? Is this a separate assessment? Is this not assistive technology? Is this a speech area that I'm concerned about? They should be able, as professionals, to be able to guide you with that question. You think
Yeah,
I got it?
exactly. So you can add a new assessment request. So perhaps a timeline array started 15 days ago on your initial assessment plan. And so maybe now you just submit another request for assessment and you start another fresh timeline specific to the assistive technology assessment. Mm-hmm. So that's an option. Your team might kind of meld the two together, say it's close enough, we'll just do it together. But other teams might say, you know what, we're going to have two separate timelines. They'll be done pretty close. We'll just have different meetings for each one. And that's
Perfect.
okay too.
Correct. Yeah.
And so if you don't have the assessment, full assessment done before you meet and talk with your IEP team and you still want to talk about assistive technology, remember nothing stops you from making requests. There's still people on your team that could give input about the assistive technology that they do know about, that they could suggest. Remember, it's a collaborative process. So you don't necessarily need an assistive technology assessment to get that consideration of assistive technology started, that conversation started with your team.
That's correct. Yes, important. So when we saw the difference, right, between consideration and assessment. So sometimes we don't need an assessment, right? It's bringing up the conversation, the concerns, and if the team is knowledgeable, we have the information, sometimes we can go directly into implementation and trials, right? So assessment is when we don't know, right? We've had the conversation and we really need more information, right? And then we can determine what kind of assessment too. Sometimes our goals, right? Remember, it's all based on our goals. So sometimes it's a different area that needs to be assessed because we also maybe don't have an information that it's up to date. There's been changes in the student. We need maybe our speech assessment, right? We need some updated goals in that area in order to be able to then consider assistive technology and find the right technology in this case, right, that could help the student meet that goal that was updated. So different kinds of assessments could be needed. So important to determine where's the need, right? What's the information that's needed? Okay, so as those were the two assessment questions. So
Yes. Go
yeah,
ahead and continue,
okay.
Anna.
Okay, and remember, you can always call us directly and call our education department as well at PHP, and we can talk about your particular case too, because sometimes there's some small details that are getting in the way of resolving something. So we can always have a discussion. Please call us or email us, info@php.com. So I'm going to keep going to where are you? So important to think about, right? So we were talking about assessment. And so think about where are you in that process, right? So have you ever talked about assistive technology with your team, right? Are you currently considering, right, assistive technology? Is your child already using it, right? There's some items in the classroom. I have a great teacher this year and she's using this and it's really helping my child. So do I need to document that, right? Could it be assistive technology for my child is actually meeting his goals with this, but if I don't have the same teacher or the same classroom next year, this is not documented in the IEP. It's not assistive technology for my child. So we need to have that discussion, right? And document whatever is working. And same with your 504, right? If your student is on a 504 plan, right? What's not going well? What is? Let's document on a plan. Next is to talk about a little bit of where we can find assistive technology. So there's different places where we can find assistive technology, and so our districts and our county have sometimes resources or should have. Sometimes I think there was a question on IEEs, right? When we disagree with any results or we're searching for other people who can do assessments, our district, our counties, our SELPAs should have lists of authorized people who can do assessments for them that they have already authorized. They should be able to provide us with those names and those lists. And those are not associated with the district when in the case of an independent educational evaluation, when there's a disagreement with the results of any assessment. Remember, you have the right to request an independent assessment, and our district can give us a list of those contacts that they are already authorized to use, or we can research on our own as well. And so you can look into local libraries. Ability Tools is a great website, and they have a resource directory as well for assessments. They also do exchange and lending. They have a lending library for assistive technology. Not sure how they're working right now under our current situation, but I believe you can at least view or speak with somebody about their resources. There's also a lot of software demos, downloads, and light versions that we can trial, right, before purchasing. Same with apps. Vendor loans, I think we will share a list with you, or we can share an e-packet from Parents Helping Parents with some lists of apps. There's also some vendors that will loan some devices for you to try out before you you purchase. And so we have our tools too. Hopefully soon we will be able to share those with families more, but you can definitely call us at PHP as well, and we can talk about where you can find assistive technology to sample or explore. Okay. And very important for you to keep yourself involved. So, as you saw, this is a consideration of assistive technology and anything in reality with your child. It's very important to have family involvement, and also for you to get involved with decision makers in your team or in your school, right? So important to keep yourself active in volunteer activities as an example, right? To be there, to have a presence with your schools, that they know you, right? In the classroom, in the school, at the district level, at the county level. There are school site councils, right, that you can participate in depending on your level of interest there. But it's always important to, especially with our children with disabilities, that we bring up our children, that we are part of the schools, right? And the decision making has to involve all children, right? Sometimes we don't realize that people don't know the needs of our children, right? It's incredible that for us, that we live every day involved with our children, but there are a lot of administrators and decision makers that, if we don't bring it up, they will kind of forget about us. So it's important to always have a voice, right? The CELPAs have an advisory committee called the CAC, Community Advisory Committee, where you, as a parent, can participate and be involved and participate in school board meetings, for example, that are open to the public. There's county offices of education, also education boards, where it's important to have a parent of a student with disabilities, right, participate at different levels, even state level, right? There's advisory committees. And so get your child involved too, right? We have teenagers that are getting to the age where they're very active in their education and in self-advocacy. So being involved at different levels will also help them in the future, right? For advocating for themselves. So very important for family to participate. And we've reached our point of key takeaways for today, which is that assistive technology consideration is based on a team approach. Okay, we are part of that team as parents. And the students' tasks and goals are the focus of the discussion of assistive technology consideration, right? Those goals need to be done first. Okay, and assistive technology consideration can be simplified for IEP teams by using a well-defined process. And we showed many examples, right? And ready available frameworks that we showed examples to, and the forms that you have now.